Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Calynn Lawrence. I'm the founder of the Holistic Healing Source for Marginalized Society. Thank you for joining us. Just a little bit about me before we jump into the lesson today. I have a doctorate in pastoral counseling. I hold multiple board certifications as a trauma specialist, and I am a credentialed neurocriminology and neuropsychotherapy professional. So I'm very excited to talk with you guys today. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let me share my screen. All right. Today we're going to talk about coaching and counseling fundamentals for spiritual advisors. How to help someone achieve their goals and overcome challenges with faith at the core. First, let's start with what is the difference between spiritual counseling and coaching and how to know what the client needs. So, spiritual counseling is going to be where a client is a person of faith, as the modality is spiritual or religious in nature. Spiritual counseling is a deeper process that involves gathering extensive background knowledge on the client and their challenges because they deal with more complex, nuanced problems. It works best when you work with a client over an extended period of time, making incremental progress that is reasonable for their circumstances. Emphasis on reasonable for their circumstances, because the focus is on the long term. And counselors operate in a way that helps the client master critical thinking skills, heal from trauma, cope with pain, and develop good habits so that they can become self sufficient at some point. Their guidance is often delivered in a more suggestive fashion that encourages the client to take a look at the big picture and improve their own decision making abilities. Spiritual coaching, on the other hand, clients, of course, should be a person of faith, as the modality is spiritual or religious in nature. Spiritual coaching is done in a more instructional or directive fashion um, than spiritual counseling is, and it has a clear cut goal with KPIs, key performance indicators, for success with the client. Their main concern is helping clients accomplish tasks and overcome clear hurdles. They emphasize accountability and strategy. Think of a football coach. They're there to help the athletes win the game. Think of a weight loss coach, a personal trainer. They're there to help you lose weight. They are usually not going to work with you forever. You're usually only going to work with the personal trainer, depending on how much weight you need to lose, until you lose the weight. That could be a year, 2 years, maybe, but you're not working with them, that long, if you're working with them that long. You know, you think about a coach coaching a team. They're maybe going to coach them for, some years, but they're usually not working with the same players for extended periods of time, right? It's more of a fast turnaround. We're measuring how many games we're winning, and that's our main KPI, that kind of thing. Also, spiritual coaching works best when you work with a client over a set period of time to establish benchmarks, formal benchmarks, and measure improvement. Their focus is usually on the short term with explicit expectations in the near future. Also, it's great for clients who have tangible or clearly defined goals and are not experiencing crisis or intense emotional overwhelm. If you have a client that is experiencing crisis or intense emotional overwhelm, or maybe they have chronic mental health conditions that are being undertreated or not treated, they are not going to be great clients for coaching. Coaching is a much more fast paced, get it together, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Let's get going and get it off the ground. Coaching is much more that kind of modality, which is great if someone is in a headspace to go in and tackle their goals in a shorter period of time when they have more tangible more clear cut goals. That's great for those people. But for people who are looking to do more of a healing journey and who are more so trying to develop critical thinking skills and develop patience and, maybe develop their social skills and things like that. People who are looking to do a lot of soul searching and all of that, those are going to be the people who are better for spiritual counseling, because it's a longer term thing. The modality is much more suggestive and guided versus directly telling them a lot of what they need to do. Also, counseling is going to be a lot more mental health informed than coaching is. There's usually, you know, um, I won't say all the time, but with spiritual coaching, or coaching in general, there's usually not any kind of degree requirement, versus with spiritual counseling for a lot of roles, you do have to have a completed degree from a college or a seminary. So there's already the difference in education level and all of that, the barrier to entry for people to become counselors versus becoming, coaches. So like just looking at all of that, that should help you determine what the client needs. And also, it could help you determine which route is better for you, or if you can do both. Me, myself, I have found that I actually find most joy through education of the social sciences of psychology and theology and trauma and, things like that, sociology. I find more joy in teaching and educating people than I do in actually working as a therapist, as like a full-time job. So for me, that's where I am. And if you are someone who's undecided, looking at the differences between a coach and a counselor, that can give you some good insight based on your personality type, your education level, and, how you prefer to work with people and all of that. Here are some examples of different spiritual counseling and coaching scenarios, just so you can get a better idea of what that looks like in actuality, how those things manifest that I just talked about. Spiritual counseling scenarios would be like the following. Sarah is having a difficult time grieving the loss of her mom, to the point where it has lessened her ability to engage in recreation, go to work, or socialize with others. She is a woman of faith who needs guidance on how she can find strength in a higher power, lean into her congregation for support, and cope with her loss. This is going to be a grief client. Okay, if you watched our presentation about common mental health conditions and how they manifest, this person could very much be exhibiting signs of clinical depression, right? So with that, and also if you watched our presentation about how trauma impacts and reflects in the body and in the brain, we talked about this a little bit as well. So in this kind of case, if Sarah is actively experiencing grief, potentially clinically depressed, potentially going through a lot of um, challenges with her mental health, she would be someone who's much better suited for counseling. Next, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are going through a rough patch in their marriage and are contemplating separation or divorce. They're seeking a faith based intervention to help them better understand each other's wants, needs, and behaviors while finding scriptural encouragement and insight to save their marriage and come to a peaceable compromise. This couple is having a lot of interpersonal issues, relational issues, and looking for someone to help guide them through the process of refinding each other and learning more about each other, and conflict resolution and communication skills, and also integrating some doctrine in there. These two people would be better off going to someone who operates in a counselor fashion, because the counselor is going to do a little bit more, like I say, soul searching and digging with them on that journey on how to refine themselves, how to refine each other, how to, build up those, social skills and critical thinking skills with each other and in their relationship. And they're just going to be a lot more big picture, right? And how they approach the couple, with the goal being If they teach them all of these skills and they take them on this journey where they've learned so much about themselves and each other and how to reconnect, hopefully they don't have to come back again, you know, versus you could take a coaching, approach to a couple like that. But if you're coaching and only working on quick goals, you're not doing a lot of diving deep, chances are, unless they're just a very self sufficient couple, chances are the counseling modality would be much better suited for them in terms of long term results. Last scenario would be Tom is deconstructing his faith after being in a high control religion his entire life and would like professional guidance to help him heal from quote unquote church hurt and discover and define his new beliefs. So Tom is going through a lot emotionally, right? Deconstructing is the process of figuring out where you stand with religion and sorting through, any religious traumas or negative experiences you've had that were tied to your faith. And when you are going through something that is that emotionally intensive and that impactful on your overall lifestyle, especially if you've got religious trauma where you have to work through that with a trained professional, Tom would be someone who's better suited for counseling. Deconstruction is a long process. As somebody who deconstructed for years, for a few years, I deconstructed my previous religious beliefs and the indoctrination that I had from the high control religion, Christian denomination that I used to be a part of. I used to be a part of Jehovah's Witnesses. And while I do believe religious freedom is important, and I do believe that if find peace or happiness within whatever religion it is, even if I disagree with the doctrine, I think that you should be able to operate in that religion that brings you peace and comfort. So for me, while I learned the very hard way that that was not a faith that was going to be sustainable for me, that I felt was healthy, that I felt was just, that I felt was culturally inclusive or diverse or equitable, um, I do recognize that people have different timelines, right? So if Tom is deconstructing, that could be a years long process. That's not something Tom's going to be able to tangibly write down some KPIs and turn it around in 6 months. That's not what most people will be able to do with something like that. So he would be a better suitor for counseling. Now, some spiritual coaching scenarios. One could be Michael is a Christian who wants to deepen his relationship with God. As such, he's decided that he would like to improve his personal Bible study regimen and reflection, increase his ministry involvement, and pursue a seminary degree. He needs someone to keep him on track and help him find resources to fast track his mission. See how with Michael, he's not in an imminent behavioral or mental health crisis. He's not exhibiting symptoms of a chronic mental health condition, but he does want guidance and advisory to help him stay on track with spiritual related goals. He wants someone who's going to be able to help him, go on this probably a relatively short journey with him. He has A, B, C, D, E, F, G KPIs. He knows what he wants. He would be a great client for spiritual coaching. Next, Kathy. Kathy is a spiritually open minded person who is seeking to gain enlightenment to figure out her divine life's purpose in accordance with her interests, education, and experience and talents. She wants a professional to help guide her on this self discovery journey and provide her with resources to nail down a good quote unquote career path that will be aligned with her strengths and faiths. Again, Kathy, same thing, not exhibiting any, high needs mental health condition. She's not, actively in crisis. She's not showing any real, at least apparent threats to her well being. So with her, and her having those more tangible goals that can be done pretty quickly, looking to do a little soul searching to find out what would be a good career path for her that's in line with her education, experience, talents, and all of that, that would still be divinely inspired. That is something that would be perfect for coaching. So that would be a good example there too. Next, you need to tailor the experience to the client's faith base. Key information about the most popular religions and their influence on counseling and coaching. I gave a brief overview of several, major religion or religious categories. And this is so that if you're working with people of those demographics, you can understand a little bit more about what they believe and, how it impacts their thinking and things like that. So, you want to optimize the client experience by ensuring the foundation is aligned with their faith. Spiritual coaching and counseling can only be effective if it is in harmony with the client's belief system. Faith and spirituality are core influences on us psychologically and sociologically. So it is imperative that we recognize their importance in our role as spiritual advisors. Some examples of problems that disunity can present include potentially offending the client. If you are unfamiliar with the client's belief systems, you could easily scare them away by doing things that would be considered insensitive or even disrespectful in their culture or religion. For example, some heavily patriarchal religions may deem it inappropriate for a woman to quote unquote lead or counsel or coach a man. In that case, it would be most appropriate for a female counselor or coach to refer male clients to other male professionals. Or perhaps if the client is someone of a religion that condemns the integration of outside spiritual practices like yoga, astrology, crystal use, or ancestral communication, they would likely not respond well if you ask them to engage in any of these things. Second, offering irrelevant intervention. If the client feels your guidance is not congruent with their lifestyle, it is easy for them to disconnect and feel unheard or misunderstood. Hence, this is why it is crucial that you take the time to comprehend their faith first and allow it to inform how you interact with them. Christianity, a basic overview. Christianity traces its roots back to around 30 CE with Jesus Christ as its monotheistic leader. The Bible is their doctrinal text with patriarchal leadership structures. Christians usually believe that Jesus was both human and divine, the Son of God, and worship him as their Savior. Different branches of Christianity may focus on salvation through faith and acceptance alone, i.e., many Methodist and Baptist churches, or on salvation through good deeds, service, and/or confessions of serious sins, i.e., many Catholic churches or Jehovah's Witnesses. In terms of afterlife beliefs, most Christians believe in heaven or hell with stipulations depending on the denomination. The core beliefs are that Jesus was born through immaculate conception, he died for mankind's sins, and he was resurrected 3 days after his execution. Some Christian denominations may observe the Mosaic Law, i.e., the Old Testament, including things that may be observing the Sabbath, dietary laws, dress codes, or sacrificial rituals. However, most adhere to the New Testament as the most updated law from God, with Jesus' crucifixion fulfilling the obligation to practice the Mosaic Law. Furthermore, many Christians follow certain routines such as attending regular church services, celebrating Easter and or Christmas, and observing communions or memorials of Christ's sacrifice. Judaism. Judaism is considered to be the oldest of the three Abrahamic religions, that's Islam, Judaism, Christianity. This is considered to be the oldest. It is believed to have originated around 1800 BCE. The Torah is their primary doctrinal text with patriarchal leadership structures, with others including the Tanakh, the Talmud, and the Midrash. According to Jewish belief systems, God created everything in the universe and is seen as both omnipresent and omniscient. Jewish people believe that they are God's chosen people who were promised a special covenant with him. This covenant was fulfilled by the life of Jesus Christ. Jews believe in monotheism and faith in both eternal reward and punishment. Additionally, Jews believe in life after death and practice rituals such as circumcision and keeping kosher dietary laws. Their main practices include prayer at set times in a synagogue and observing holidays such as Passover, Hanukkah, and Yom Kippur. Islam. Islam began with Muhammad around 610 CE when he received revelations from Allah, their monotheistic God, that were later compiled into the Quran. The Quran is their doctrinal text with patriarchal leadership structures that contains 114 chapters or surahs that provide guidance for believers to live a life according to God's will. Muslims look to Muhammad as their prophet and last messenger from Allah, who delivered his teachings via revelation from Allah himself. Muslims must repent for past sins and place faith in Allah and reject any notion of a trinity or incarnation as blasphemous against Allah's uniqueness. Muslims may adhere to a strict set of practices known as Sharia law that dictate how they should live their lives. Emphasis on may, that depends on the Muslim. Muslims also believe in afterlife. Those who lead good lives according to Allah's will are rewarded with paradise, while those who do not are punished by being sent to hell. Muslims observe 5 pillars of faith, including belief in one God, Tawheed, prayer 5 times a day, facing Mecca, Salat, charity to those in need, Zakat, fasting during Ramadan, Psalm, and performing pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in one's lifetime if they can afford it, Hajj. Buddhism. Buddhism is a spiritual tradition focused on achieving enlightenment or nirvana by following the teachings of Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, which primarily center around the concept of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, emphasizing that life inherently involves suffering caused by desire, and that the path to liberation from this cycle in practicing it lies in practicing morality, meditation, and wisdom, while accepting the principles of karma, cause and effect, and reincarnation. Buddhists do not believe in a personal God, instead, focusing on spiritual development and reaching a state of inner peace through ethical conduct and meditation. The religion has gender neutral leadership structures. They do not believe in heaven or hell in the traditional senses. They strive to achieve nirvana, a state of complete liberation from suffering and the cycle of rebirth. Buddhism has evolved into various schools with distinct practices and interpretations, including Theravada, Mahayana, and Varayana. Sorry if my pronunciation is off there. The Buddhist community, including monks and lay followers, play a vital role in supporting and promoting spiritual practice. Hinduism. Hinduism embraces many religious ideas. Because of this, it's sometimes referred to as a way of life or a family of religions as opposed to a single organized religion. They also do not have a single source of truth or doctrinal text and instead embrace numerous sacred writings. Most forms of Hinduism are henotheistic, which means they worship a single deity known as Brahman, but recognize other gods and goddesses. It has both matriarchal and patriarchal leadership structures. Followers believe that numerous paths lead to God and salvation. Hindus believe in samsara, the continuous cycle of life, death, and reincarnation, and karma, the universal law of cause and effect. Atman, or the belief in soul, is their philosophy that living creatures have a soul and they're all part of the supreme soul. The goal is to achieve moksha, or salvation, which ends the cycle of rebirths to become part of the absolute soul. Hindus strive to achieve dharma, which is a code of living that emphasizes good conduct and morality. Hindus revere all living creatures, including animals, and consider the cow to be sacred. Hence, most don't eat beef or pork, and many are vegetarians, actually, some even vegans. Hinduism is closely related to Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism. Lastly, here's a general spirituality basic overview. Because when people say, that they're spiritual, not religious, or that they may practice a folk religion, that can mean a lot of different things. Many people in today's society, especially millennials and Gen Zs, subscribe to more holistic spiritual beliefs over a set singular religion, namely the Abrahamic ones. The Abrahamic ones, because they are pretty objectively the most strict and have gained a reputation for being more judgmental, I would say, among the major religions. Many millennials and Gen Zs, especially, have begun leaving the churches in droves. So many of them have adopted more holistic spiritual beliefs as a result. This can look very different depending on the person, with quote unquote spiritual being a very fluid term that can take on numerous forms and influences from varying cultures, philosophies, or faiths. Oftentimes, people who identify as quote unquote spiritual but not religious ascribe to practices deriving from quote unquote folk religions that are heavily centered on a deep connection with the earth, the universe, and our ancestors. These include things such as indigenous traditional religions, voodoo, hoodoo, Wicca, Santeria, etc. Some may partake in rituals that involve witchcraft or divination, allowing them perceived power to influence others, manipulate energies, or directly communicate with supernatural beings and deceased ancestors. People who practice spirituality are usually uninterested in counseling or coaching that enforces a universal moral code that is one size fits all, namely like the Abrahamic religions, and instead prefer to have flexibility and creative liberties in how they receive guidance. General spirituality is a common place for people to go who believe in a higher power and desire a relationship with that, but do not support the politics, culture, and restriction that comes with organized religion. So, when working with these clients, it's imperative that you keep that in mind, that they are going to likely look at the world and life in a much less black and white, good and bad sense as someone, particularly from an Abrahamic religion, probably would. And being able to allow the client, that freedom to not feel tied down to a universal moral code. Or not feel like they're being explicitly preached to follow a certain doctrine, that is very important for making them feel at ease and comfortable with you as a client. Connection needs to be at the foundation. How to professionally build rapport and trust. First off, properly quote unquote pairing with the client or clients while adhering to ethical guidelines to avoid what is called a dual relationship. A trusting, comfortable relationship with your client or clients is necessary to be an impactful spiritual advisor. Your coaching or counseling will be exponentially more effective if the client has bonded with you and feels that you are dependable. Pairing, quote unquote, is the therapeutic term for when a coach or counselor intentionally connects with the client in the early stages of working with them. Depending on your client's experiences, age, condition, and personality, this process could take one session or it could take a few. After which, if you have been unable to build rapport after a few sessions, you should refer them to someone who may be a better match. So I would recommend, if it's taking more than 3 or 4 sessions to feel like the client has gotten a little comfortable with you, you can have some back and forth dialogue, maybe even tell a little joke, have a little laugh, something like that. If it's taking, I would say, anything more than 4 sessions, you probably should just refer them to someone else who may be a better match for them. Some ways to pair with them could be sharing in a preferred activity, getting to know each other over a preferred meal. And when I'm saying preferred, I'm saying the client's preference, not your preference. Getting to know each other over a preferred meal, or following their lead in the conversation to gain a deeper understanding of their initial thoughts and motivations. Ask them open ended questions to gain further insights, even. Establish yourself as someone that has their best interest at heart from the very beginning and takes their input very seriously. However, It is imperative that you, as their spiritual counselor or coach, maintain professionalism by adhering to ethical guidelines of maintaining an appropriate singular relationship. Singular relationship within the therapy context means that your dynamic is only that of a coach or counselor and client. Allowing a dual relationship to form is not only unethical, but it is unlawful in many places. You should have a friendly rapport without the client actually viewing you as a personal friend or peer. And what that looks like is how you can how you can tell, when a client is starting to view you as a personal peer or friend, if they are asking to hang out with you outside of the context of therapy, if they are, calling you outside of the context of the professional relationship, if they're overly inquisitive about your life and what's going on with you and seeing, more into your personal private time, they may be beginning to blur those lines. Because think about it this way: when you go to a hospital and you go for a checkup with your PCP, with your primary care provider, you're not digging into all of this information about their private lives. You might have a little bit of small talk at the beginning of that 20-minute appointment, but you're not asking them to hang out. You're not doing all of this other stuff. And people look at it differently because they're saying, oh, but my therapist, my counselor, whoever, that's different because that's more so like my mental health, not my physical health. But they don't realize that objectivity on the professional's part and bias on the professional's part can still very much be compromised if they have a personal relationship with you. And then also, it does nothing to help you better listen to their advice if you're viewing them as a personal friend or a peer. Think of it this way: how many people who've been in therapy before, right? And I can say this for myself, and I know a crap ton of other people who have the same experience. How many people have been in therapy and had their family member, their friend, their partner tell them the same exact advice as their therapist or their counselor did? But when their therapist or counselor did, they listened and they got it. But when their friend or relative or whoever gave essentially the same advice, maybe they didn't use all the professional language, maybe it wasn't as buttoned up and concise, but it was essentially the same message. When they did it, they weren't receptive. Why is that? Because when we have close relationships with people, we are much less likely, and when I say close relationships, I mean close personal relationships, where it's not that dynamic of they're the professional, I'm the client. When we have those close personal relationships where we feel like we're peers or we're on comparable playing grounds, we're much less likely to listen to them because we view them as being no more informed or no more qualified to judge a situation than we are. And that should not be the case. If you are paying a therapist or a counselor to provide you guidance, or even a coach, if you're paying them to provide you this guidance, you should respect them as the professional. You should look at their opinion as being this 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 ray of light that is necessary for you to get where you're trying to go, right? It shouldn't be looked at as the same way you would look at your friend giving you comparable advice, where it's like a man, maybe I do, maybe I don't. You should take it with a much more serious grain of salt. Again, using the example of the PCP, you're not going to go to your checkup with your PCP and argue about why, you drinking, a bottle of wine every night, during your pregnancy. You're not going to argue with them about why you shouldn't be doing that. You're not going to argue with them if you're, and this is me speaking as a plus size person, you're not going to argue with them about you being 300 pounds being potentially unhealthy and putting you at a much higher risk for certain chronic health conditions. You're not going to argue with them about that. Why? Because you respect their professional opinion. Same with your therapist, your counselor, or coach. You should not be taking what they say to be just anecdotal. It should be taken with the same seriousness and held to the same professional authority as any other healthcare provider. So, for those reasons, do not engage in dual relationships. It has been scientifically proven that it not only blurs the lines of influence and limits the ability to take your advice seriously, but it also compromises your objectivity and the quality of reasoning that you can do in sessions. To avoid a dual relationship, here's a few tips. Ensure that you are not communicating or hanging out with the client in non-professional circumstances. You should also refrain from following them on social media. But a quick footnote, if they want to follow you on your professional account, that's fine. Like, let's say you as a counselor, or maybe the practice you work at, you all have professional social media accounts that only post mental health related content, and it's professional. That's fine if they want to follow you on that account. But you as an individual on your personal accounts should not be friends with your clients on social media. You just shouldn't. You should also avoid giving or accepting lavish gifts. And also remember that sessions are to be about the client, so keeping the details of your personal life story limited and less helpful to the client should be something you strive to do. You should avoid using pet names or endearing titles when dealing with older teens and adults, with a footnote being when dealing with children, it's more so acceptable to occasionally use terms such as buddy or sweetie, depending on the circumstances, particularly if they're in crisis and you're trying to calm them down and you know that those terms of endearment will help regulate them and get them back to baseline. That may be something that may be viewed as more acceptable. But if you're talking about, people who are in high school or adults, like, using pet names is just not needed, because at that point, chances are they're old enough and mature enough to where you can do that kind of intervention without having to baby talk them, so to speak. Like, you don't have to baby talk them in the same way as you might have to do with a 7-year-old. And lastly, you should avoid physical touch unless initiated by the client and appropriate in nature. Obviously, if your client tries to tongue kiss you, that's a no-go. But if your client, for whatever reason, wants to give you a hug or a handshake or a high five or whatever it is, and you're comfortable with that, they're comfortable with that, it's professional, it's appropriate, then fine. But you, as the counselor, coach, therapist, you should not be the one initiating these things. Even if you know that they appreciate physical contact, you never know how they're feeling that day. Maybe they, have in times past given you a hug after a breakthrough session where you've gotten them all emotional and they're all amped up. Maybe in the past they might have ended those sessions with a hug, but today they might not feel like it. So always leave that on their part. Maintaining professional privacy. While spiritual advisory is not generally considered privileged information under HIPAA, unless the professional is also a credentialed mental health professional, it is still strongly recommended that you treat your counseling and coaching sessions as such. As a professional who works with vulnerable populations and is viewed as an example of spiritual fortitude, you would do well to prioritize the confidentiality of your sessions. Okay? Some ways that you can do this include keeping all conversations between you and your clients unless they have expressed plans to harm themselves or someone else, in which case you can call 988, the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline, or 911. For example, priests may keep confessions private as protected by some state laws. You should avoid conflicts of interest by offering services to people who are in close relation to one another, unless they are seeking couples or family sessions. So you probably don't want to see two siblings at the same time, at least. You don't want to see them to risk disclosing accidentally information that the other one might have said. Okay? Also, you should change all client names to code names in your notes and keep your notes in a secure place. When I was working in clinic in peds, we would just use initials, like, in our notes. We just used initials. Like, and if two kids had the same initials, we would, like, I think we would use like a number to like specify age or whatever. So if you have a Zach Thomas who's 10 and a Zoe Thompson who's 8, like you could use the 10 and the 8 to differentiate. Also, do not disclose your clientele base to anyone who does not work for your practice. This includes not just directly telling people who your clients are, but also when you see them in public, if you're out and about in public running into them, do not engage unless they approach you first. This is for all therapists, truly. They usually follow this because of HIPAA. And it's because essentially the public can overhear or oversee your reaction. And if they didn't otherwise speak to you, it can then be revealed that you're counseling them. And, they may not want people to know that, especially if you're running into them while they're with other people. So just allowing them to approach you if they choose to in public, if you run into them, is a good practice. But if they choose not to, just keep it going. Don't take it personal. It's all about maintaining their rightful privacy. Establishing HEART goals with the clients. HEART standing for healthy, engaged, applicable, realistic, and timely. What are HEART goals and why do you need them? HEART goals are goals that adhere to these principles: healthy, engaged, applicable, realistic, timely. They help to provide a holistic and attainable roadmap for the client's journey. At the beginning of your client's journey, ideally after you've paired with each other, you should sit down with them to clarify what they're hoping to attain from your counseling or coaching services. From there, write out a list with them that showcases their objectives and come up with a practical plan together for how you'll get there. The HEART goals need to be embodying the following principles. Healthy, meaning the overall well-being of your client is always top priority. So ensuring that goals won't compromise their mental or physical health is key. Engaged, the goals should actively involve daily work from your clients so that they continually keep their head in the game. Applicable, don't waste time on irrelevant goals or tasks. If a goal isn't directly tied to progress, let it go. Realistic, to avoid disappointment that could potentially be detrimental to your client's health and progress. Keep your goals grounded in pragmatic expectations. This way, they can be pleasantly surprised if they surpass them instead of devastated if they fall short of them. Pragmatism, very necessary in treatment of clients. Lastly, timely. Think short term and long term in your goal setting, so there is a regularly occurring checkpoint or benchmark that will motivate them to stay on track. It is also great to have uh, incremental positive reinforcement that will encourage them to try their best. A heart goal example would be Kathy wants to grow her social circle and make new friends. To do this, she plans to attend at least one community event a week and network with her local peers who have similar interests, aiming to connect with at least one person per event via phone number or social media. Once connected with them, she will take the initiative to start the first post event conversation and see where it goes. In her sessions, you may choose to work on building up her confidence and strengthening her social skills. Next, listening to understand, observing to analyze, and asking to clarify. Steering sessions to see the full picture, plus some note taking tips. Get the most out of sessions as a counselor or a coach. As a spiritual advisor, you want to ensure that your sessions are productive and meaningful, especially for your client. To do this, you need to conduct them in a way that allows you to take in as much about the client as possible without coming off as overwhelming. You'll have to master the art of balance and deductive reasoning from both things implied and explicitly stated in your sessions. This includes listening to understand. As someone's counselor or coach, you need to be a phenomenal listener. This entails being able to let them speak uninterrupted unless a question or redirection is needed. It also means having high emotional intelligence, being able to pick up on subtle shifts in tone or speed, hesitancy to discuss a topic, or a noticeable fixation and passion for a certain topic. All of these are indicators of how a person feels about whatever it is that is being discussed. Next, observing to analyze. Being able to read the room and catch nonverbal cues as a counselor or coach is vital. Pay great attention to the body language, such as someone appearing tense or nervous, dodging eye contact, compulsively tapping or fidgeting, or even showing signs of physical harm, such as bruises, cuts, etc. Lastly, asking to clarify. Choose your questions wisely when you're asking Choose your questions wisely, because when you're asking too many, it can sour the vibe of the session and come off interrogatory. When you do ask questions, be direct and concise so that both you and the client can be on the same page. And also avoid prompting or leading their responses so as to get their most authentic reply. For example, you should ask, "How did it make you feel when he did that?" instead of, "Did you feel upset when he did that?" So avoid prompting them by implying anything within your question. Make it as direct and transparent and neutral as possible. Some note taking tips. When in session, always take notes to reference in the future. This is not only good for helping you recall key information, but it is also great for recognizing progress or catching regression in clients when it may not seem that apparent, and for giving their next care provider a comprehensive overview of the client if need be. Some tips that you should adhere to when writing sessions include following the SOAP note format. Include elements that are subjective, meaning the patient's feelings, perspective, or thoughts. Objective, things that were directly observed on or measured by the coach or counselor. Assessment, an evaluation of the client's state. And plan, thoughts on how to best move forward. An example of this could be Omar expressed that he was very sad about losing his job and the financial uncertainty of how he will pay his bills now that he is unemployed. He was visibly distraught by this and spent half of the session weeping. I believe that he may be at risk of harming himself due to his history with suicidal ideation and his poverty trauma being a big trigger. I referred him to the 988 hotline, his local NAMI living room support group, and gave him some employment resources to aid in his job search. I will continue to monitor his behavior for any alarming tells and will escalate if needed. So that covered the subjective, the objective, the assessment, and the plan. Also, you should strive to maintain privacy. Use code names for all clients in your notes in case that they are compromised. Also, avoid using names of their associates and instead refer to them by their relation, i.e. brother number 2, sister number 1. Store your notes in a secure location that is protected via a physical password or lock, and do not give this information to anyone who isn't employed by your practice. How and when to professionally offer well-informed feedback and guidance. Give educated, customized, holistic advice for optimal outcomes. As a spiritual counselor or coach, it is critical that your advice is sound, rooted in facts, not feelings, and is actually doable for the client. If it isn't, this could have disastrous consequences that could not only harm the client, but it could destroy your relationship with them due to severed trust. Here are some things to keep in mind when counseling or coaching. 1, your advice needs to be tailored to the client and their goals, not your personal preferences. For example, your personal preference for a client who is experiencing some mild or moderate adversities within their congregation may be for them to leave their current religion altogether because you disagree with its doctrine. However, if that client feels content within that faith, and does not show any signs of actual abuse or harm from it, and has an array of people or things keeping them there, it would be unprofessional to ask them to leave that faith just because they're having some moderate issues within their congregation, for example, and you disagree with the doctrine at the core. So telling them, using this as the opportunity to say, oh, well, this is your time to leave. You just need to leave because you disagree with the religion, that would not be professional. Another example could be if a client was having some recurring issues with their spouse and child's parent that were upsetting but not grossly neglectful or abusive. And they desired to figure out a strategy to work through these issues and save their marriage. If you were to then suggest they just divorce, because that is the decision you would personally make in this circumstance, that would be very unprofessional. If they've made it clear that their goal is to work it out with their partner and they're not grossly neglectful or abusive, then who are you to say, oh, well, I wouldn't take that. I would just leave. And then telling them to do such. That's not helpful. That's not helpful. And it's very unprofessional. And you likely will lose that client because they're going to feel very unheard and unseen. Unless it's a threat to their overall well-being, the marriage, you should not be telling them to just up and get divorces, especially when there are children involved and a lot of other factors at play. You just running to say, oh, well, if I was you, I would get a divorce. I wouldn't put up with that. It wouldn't be worth fighting for me. That's very unprofessional. Next, your advice needs to be pragmatic. When counseling or coaching someone, you want to avoid giving advice that isn't firmly rooted in reality by not being overly idealistic nor pessimistic. Leaning into a holistic overview of the client, their abilities, and overall circumstances will yield the best results. For example, if a young adult client is living with their parents that they constantly argue with and is currently financially dependent on them, your counsel should not be telling them to move out on their own prematurely if their health is not in imminent danger. Instead, you should work with them to become financially stable and strengthen their conflict resolution skills and develop healthy outlets in the meantime to help them cope. If you know that they don't have any money, they don't have any post-secondary education, they don't have any resources that or people that they can just safely move in with, just because they're arguing with their parents and they're, 18, 19, 20, you telling them to do that so they can just avoid arguing with their parents and they'll quote unquote have peace in that way would be very, very unprofessional and in the grand scheme of things even more harmful than, unless it was an intense level of abuse or neglect on their parents' part. It would be much more detrimental, especially if we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with physical needs being at the very baseline of the pyramid, because without water, shelter, food, so on and so forth, we literally can't survive. You telling them to just forgo the hierarchy of needs and strike it out on their own when they have no resources, no money, no education, no support system that's reliable to where they can move in with them or whatever. You telling them to do that is not at all pragmatic, nor is it professional, nor is it helpful. You as a therapist, a counselor, a coach have to look at the big picture of everything and take all factors into account, again, being firmly rooted in reality, not overly hopeful ideals. You telling your client to move out of their parents' house because you could be a famous TikToker and make $1 million a year, that is horrible advice, because the vast majority of odds are that that will not happen for them, especially not that quick. So instead, you being a good therapist, counselor, or coach, you need to instead strengthen those conflict resolution skills so they can mitigate those arguments and lessen the arguments a lot better. Give them some more healthy coping mechanisms that they can do in the meantime to deal with the dysfunction, and get them in school. Get them in a job training program. Get them, if they want to join the military or whatever it is, get them to that point of financial stability. Remember, healing and growth are not easy processes, so prepare for potential pushback. It's completely normal. Keep that in mind when you're offering any kind of guidance or advice professionally. People may push back. They may get upset. They may not like what you say. So just don't take that personally. It's normal. Assigning relevant homework to the clients for amplified results and personal reflection. Fast track results by giving personal assignments to your clients. Assigning clients homework provides a significant benefit by allowing them to practice and reinforce the skills learned during their sessions in real life situations. leading to more lasting change and improved treatment outcomes. Some benefits of homework include that clients can actively practice new coping mechanisms, thought patterns, and behaviors in everyday life, which helps them integrate these skills into their routines. Completing homework tasks can help clients become more aware of their thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and provide valuable insights for further discussion. Homework assignments can allow you to track client progress and adjust treatment plans accordingly, ensuring the interventions are effectively addressing their needs. And taking responsibility for completing the homework task can build a sense of agency and confidence in managing their own challenges. Some types of homework that are highly rated by therapists and clients include journaling prompts. This is good for self reflection and externalizing one's feelings. Worksheets. This is good for mapping one's thoughts and strategizing next steps. Self care or improvement regimens. This is good for improving the client's overall well being and stress levels. Interpersonal tasks or exercises. This is good for nudging the client to take necessary actions or build up crucial skills that they may be delaying. Try to only assign one piece of homework per session so that the client isn't overwhelmed. But those are just some good examples of homework that you could give. Celebrating progress with positive reinforcement. This is a big one. Gold stars work for a reason. The foundations of all human behavior, per B.F. Skinner, are stimulus response stimulus or antecedent behavior consequence. This essentially means that every action we take is a result of an internal or external factor or event preceding the action, and the action is either reinforced or punished by the following consequence, positive or negative. Spiritual advisors are encouraged to focus on positive reinforcement, not negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is when you encourage someone directly or indirectly to repeat an action through the use of rewards or praise. It works in education, counseling, and coaching because it creates a positive association with desired behaviors, motivating individuals to repeat those actions by providing rewards or praise, which is ultimately leading to increased engagement and lasting behavior change, making it a key tool for facilitating progress. It also boosts the client's confidence in their ability to change and achieve desired outcomes and helps them to associate positive feelings with the behaviors they are trying to develop, making them more likely to repeat those actions. Hence, this is why it's a good component and should be a key component and steady practice with your clients. The time increments will depend on the client, their age, and their goals, but the principle remains. Examples of positive reinforcement can include verbal praise and positive feedback. It can be physical awards with milestones such as certificates or trophies or sobriety chips and coins. It can be a token system if working with children or contained populations such as the incarcerated. You go to this many amounts of, group therapy, you get outside time, you get extra on commissary, you get this, you get that. Or allowing a client to engage in a preferred activity after demonstrating desired behaviors if working with children or contained populations. If you manage to pass this class with an A, then you can go to this school dance. If you manage to not, get into altercations with your peers for an entire 30 days, then you get to have, a free day at school or, whatever it is, like just coming up with those ways to motivate them. Group dynamics, how to facilitate a powerful spiritual support group. So we've been talking a lot about one-on-one work, but we're now going to talk about working in groups, which is a little bit different. Tips to maximize the experience and outcomes in your support group. Running a support group involves a lot of the same principles as both one-on-one and family coaching and counseling. However, the difference is that in a group setting, you will have a much shorter dialogue with each individual participant. And instead, you'll have to tailor the focus to goals or topics that are applicable and attainable to numerous people. To optimize your experience as the facilitator and the experience of your participants, you can follow a few golden rules. One, give the group a theme so that all participants have a common ground. This ensures that everyone can relate to each other in at least one way. For example, you wouldn't want to start a support group with an ambiguous or overly broad target audience, such as adults dealing with stress or people who've ever had cancer. These titles cast too wide of a net and could bring in too wide of a variety of people for the group to feel in sync. It would be better to narrow it down to something like adults living with PTSD or women actively battling cancer. Number two, keep the group to 20 people or less. This makes the conversation much more intimate and less intimidating for participants to engage. It also limits the amount of names, faces, and backstories that you have to recall as a facilitator, leading to a better quality experience. Number three, lay the ground rules up front. Keep everyone on the same page by letting them know what the expectations are. Four, start off with 1 or 2 minute check ins for all willing participants and allow time for further elaboration if desired once everyone has checked in. This keeps the group equitable so that everyone who wants to share has a chance to talk. But if people are not in the mood to share that day, don't force them. Sometimes people are in a place where they just don't have it to talk and to engage in the conversation, but they want to listen and they can be motivated by the experiences of the other group members. Obviously, make sure that they belong in the group. Don't just let a random stranger, sit in. But if there's someone and you've worked with them before, if they don't have the capacity to share, don't make them, you know? So once everyone's done a 1 to 2 minute check in at the forefront, at the end, if there's anyone who needs elaboration or wants to ask the group for feedback, that's the time to do that. And lastly, keep the time under 2 hours. Groups are most impactful when they are 2 hours or less so that participants don't get bored or lost in the process. When hosted properly, a 1 to 2 hour support group, depending on headcount, is enough time to inspire positivity and progress, especially when you are dealing with neurodivergent populations where attention span, hyperactivity, those may be issues for them. They may, have ADHD. They may have uh, they may have bipolar. They may have um, autism. They may have a variety of things that may make it difficult for them to stay engaged in that kind of social interaction for over 2 hours. So making sure that you keep it 2 hours or less, that ups the chances of people being actively engaged and having a positive experience. Always offer additional resources to clients for expanded care and extra support. Make sure that your clients have what they need, whether they're an individual client, a group client, a family client, whoever. As a coach and counselor, your chief concern is the happiness, healthiness, and progress of your client. Because of this, you should always have additional resources to offer them outside of your services. You won't always be able to speak with them or see them, so you need to equip them with the needed tools to be self-sufficient when you're out of reach. Also, you probably won't be working with them forever. So them having those resources on their own it's vital to their progress. This empowers the client and fosters that accountability and responsibility within them while removing some of the burden from yourself. So it not only helps them, it helps you. Some life-changing tools that coaches and counselors can offer their clients include the link to the National NAMI website, NAMI.org, NAMI.org, or their local affiliate chapter of NAMI to find free mental health support services via phone, chat, and in person, the 988 National Suicide and Crisis Hotline, a list of trusted relevant social service agencies, employment programs, shelters, churches, or nonprofits, a list of trusted self-help media, so books, podcasts, websites, blogs, etc., and directing them to where they can find free or low-cost community events, classes, or other activities to serve as an outlet, so like libraries, community centers, that kind of stuff. And that's it. That's it for the fundamentals of spiritual coaching and counseling. As you see, here are the reference slides for further reading. If you want to check out any of these references, they're all great references, peer-reviewed academic studies, all of that good stuff. So if you want to check it out, here they are. And thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this session, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Happy coaching and counseling.